Welcome back to If You're Fat, Lose Weight, and we are honored to be joined by the best-looking Jewish man in sports media, a man who we will try not to get banned from MSG, probably the single person I'm most excited to interview to try to get him to answer any questions, a man who knows more about New York sports than anyone in the world, the yin to Frank Isola's Yang, formerly of ESPN and now of SNY, the great, the very handsome Ian Begley. Welcome to the show, my man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, Joel, come on, man. It's my pleasure. The first title, I mean, I'm going Mike Greenberg, handsomest Jewish guy in sports media. That's just me. But I appreciate you putting me there. Greenberg is a handsome guy.
Just because he's on TV more than you doesn't mean he's more handsome, okay? That's what I've always maintained. Although I'm very ugly and I'm not on any TV, so maybe there's something to that. Well, Ian, okay, so I really want to, we're going to talk sports, obviously. I want to hear your opinions on the NBA, etc. But I want to get to know you a little bit. I mean, I know you, but I think it's fascinating. A lot of I have these long form conversations, and we'll talk about sports, but I want to hear how you became a sports broadcaster too. So, you grew up in Rockland County, New York.
Yes.
You went to University of Richmond, home of the Spiders, which I had to Google. Did not know that. Did you remember that? The home of the Spiders?
Kenny Atkinson, alum.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so when did you know you wanted to get into sports media?
Yeah, I think in college, I knew the journalism bug had really bit me in college, and I was always just a passionate sports fan, and I just thought of it as a good way to kind of marry the two. And look, I didn't know where it was going to go at that point, obviously, but I started to work for the school newspaper, and I started to work for the newspaper in town, the Richmond Times-Dispatch. And I just fell in love with it, dove fully into it. And I was lucky enough to get an internship at the New York Daily News coming out of school, and just did everything that they asked me there and had a lot of fun with that internship. There was a Bravo reality show being filmed at the time called Tabloid Wars that depicted the New York Daily News against the New York Post, Frank Isola versus Mark Berman, if you will. Yeah. And so they had fun with me as an intern back then, but just continued to work and was fortunate enough to get a gig there covering high school sports. And man, I'm sure you know this, like the high school sports scene, really anywhere there's talented players, it's going to be fun. But covering it in New York City, I mean, that was probably my most cherished time in my career. Just the characters that you meet, the people that are there that want to see the media there because they want the coverage, as opposed to pro sports in the town where they're weary of the coverage. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, high school sports at the Daily News, and then over to ESPN, covering a little bit of everything, which led to ultimately covering the Knicks full time. And it's been a fortunate run, very lucky to be with the people that I've been with, learn from the people I've learned with, get to know the people I've gotten to know, including yourself. And here we are, Knicks. Surprising everybody, including yourself, I would think, with the way they're playing at the moment.
Knicks are definitely surprised. We're taping this on Thursday, March 9th. If everything goes well, we will run this Tuesday, the 13th. I can't do math. But so yeah, the Knicks are playing well. We will get to that. But let's go back a little bit, what you said. So in college, you were writing for a newspaper. You said, what were you covering?
Baseball team. The baseball team in Richmond was their best, most competitive team when I was there. So I was covering the baseball team a lot. I was also in the town paper. I was working as an editor. So I was editing stories and writing headlines and working late nights, like weeknights, weekend nights, where I would get out of there at 1 a.m. And, I was had a fun social life, but that had to take a back seat to what was going on then. And I learned a ton. from a lot of very generous people who spent a lot of time kind of teaching me the ropes. But, anybody who's in this business will tell you that it's a grind. I mean, forget about weekends, forget about holidays. You have to be kind of locked in on whatever the sport is you're covering, and the calendar kind of no longer matters. And so I learned that early on. But it was long hours, but a lot of valuable time spent late at that newsroom in downtown Richmond.
And were you making any money?
No.
Like, did they pay you anything, or was it just because back when we were interns, when we were like in college and right outside of college, maybe even in high school, they could do unpaid internships. You could have an unpaid internship. So were you making any money, or was it fully unpaid?
It was actually a part-time job, so I was making some money there. Man, I can't even remember what it was. It was not a lot of money at all. And then the Daily News, it was paid, but it was again, I think it was like maybe $50 or $100 a paycheck every couple, something like that. So yeah, it was back in those days when there were either unpaid internships or internships where you got very little money. But the gig at the Times Dispatch was a part-time gig.
Got it. Okay. And then you worked at ESPN, and then in 2019 you joined SNY, right?
Yes.
And you cover the Knicks, but you also cover the Nets also.
Yeah. We do Nets coverage, cover stuff around the league, but the primary focus is the Knicks, just because of our market and where most of the interest at the moment lies is with the Knicks.
Well, most of the interest at the moment lies certainly with the Knicks, but even a year ago when the Nets had the big three, it's still a Knicks town through and through, fully. The Nets can't get any traction. Is that a fair statement? And why do you think that is?
I don't know. I don't have all the numbers in front of me. I can only speak to my own experience. And it surprised me because I thought that with the big three in Brooklyn, even with things not going as well as anybody wanted them to on the floor, that they would kind of gain some traction and indent a little bit into the split of the fan base locally here in New York. Obviously, things going haywire off the floor couldn't have helped. But even with that, it was still not as much of an impact as I had anticipated. It was still a Knick town, just based on what I had been seeing and what we had been seeing. The Knicks coverage still resonated in a much bigger way, audience-wise. Maybe that's just a product of generation upon generation of fans here being Knick fans, and the Nets needing to be here for a couple of decades before they make that big imprint. But I was surprised because you had two of the best players on the planet in Brooklyn, and just didn't have the kind of impact, at least from what we saw, that I would have thought it would.
Right. Yeah. To me, it's surprising. I mean, Durant, Kyrie, and then whoever else they had with them. I would have thought they would have got a little more traction, but it's just a Knicks town.
They never played together too.
Yeah, that's true.
That certainly couldn't have helped.
Right. But it's just a Knicks town, and I wonder if you gave them the opportunity to go back in time when they were deciding where to go play together, if they think they made the right choice, even coming here. I mean, I don't know if you ever asked them that, or if they would ever comment on that. But what they could have done for the New York Knicks would have been, it would have been astronomical. But anyways, okay. So 2010, you join ESPN. That's right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And at that point, does ESPN have one guy covering the Knicks, a few people, or are they still just kind of a national brand?
At that point, they had started the local websites where they had a website in Chicago, a website in Dallas, a website in LA, a website in Boston, and a website in New York. And they did have, somebody covering the Knicks. So I was working there. I was covering a little bit of everything, depending on the season: NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL. And Chris Sheridan at the time was covering the Knicks for ESPN New York. And during the basketball season, I would help out Chris kind of write the second story of the night. And then that turned into an opening eventually, where I was fortunate enough to slide into covering the team with another reporter, Jared Zwirling, So he and I covered the team for, I believe, a season or two together. And then he moved to, I believe, Bleacher Report. And then I was left there covering the team on my own since. So it was certainly a fun run there, man. And you knew it because you were there for a lot of it. There wasn't a lot of success on the floor, but there always seemed to be something to talk about with you guys.
I would say so.
Always somehow, some way, you guys were a part of the topic of the conversation, even nationally. So,
right,
it made for a busy stretch, but a good stretch from my standpoint.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there was always the Daily News and the Post and the Times. I guess the Times doesn't really cover them as much, and then with the, to your point about the ESPN having local websites, the Athletic came on the scene, Bleacher Report, and like the media scrum kind of grew.
You might have had it right when you said scum. I think that's a Freudian slip there from your Knicks days.
Okay. I mean, sure. So, all right. So I want to get into MSU a little bit, and just truth be told, we have an agreement that you have full editing power after the fact of this, as to not upset anybody at the Trump White House, aka MSG, where you get banned, and we can take that part out too. We don't have to run that. But okay, so when you're going about cultivating relationships, like, I mean, most people, I don't even know if they. I almost was a sports broadcaster. I almost went down that road myself. So like the nuances of how you become, how you work the beat of a team has dramatically changed. You can hear about, if you listen to Bob Ryan speak or Jackie McMullen, you hear how it used to be where they were in the rooms and then there stopped being full access. They were in the rooms. They were on the planes. There stopped being full access to the players, the teams, the front office people. And I would imagine it's especially challenging in a place like New York with the Knicks. So how does one become like a Knicks beat writer, coverer, because you're on TV too? And like, how do you go about cultivating relationships without giving up too much of your secret sauce?
Sure. So I think I can only speak really specifically to the Knicks because I haven't been on a beat in other instances, but just I think from what I've observed, it seems like in a general sense, first of all, I think some teams deal with their beat writers differently. Every team, I'm sure, has a different policy, but some teams, they kind of seem to use it to their advantage where they will, feed some information to reporters locally to kind of get their word out. The Knicks haven't taken that approach. And I think the other thing here is, and not necessarily just here, but everywhere, is social media has it's taken away the clout that the traditional media had, because now players can get their story out, get their information out on their own platform. So the dynamic between team and media outlet, independent media outlet, has changed significantly, I think, because of that. Because back when Bob Ryan, Jackie McMullen, teams were getting their messaging out through the newspaper. And so the newspaper had a significant amount of power in the dynamic of that relationship. Now it's diminished. So you have to, for me, like, I've never tried to rely on, not to get too deep into it, but the traditional avenues for information, because I know that those are going to more often than not be very fruitful. So I try to kind of work around or work different avenues rather than the person at the top kind of feeding stuff to reporters, because that's not the case here, at least in my experience of it. And actually, I like it because it allows, just as a human being, I feel like I could be more just fully unvarnished, truthful in my reporting and my opinion and read on the situation with this team, because I'm not reliant on somebody at the top of an organization to hand me information at a given time in order to kind of have value as a reporter. So that's just that's kind of the lay of the land as I see it, and as it's evolved over the years.
Okay, so is it a daily thing that you're doing? You're contacting people. The one thing you made a really good point, right? It's like, you're no longer on the plane with these guys, but social media has given you, not you specifically, but given reporters potential access that they ordinarily wouldn't have had. There was probably a stopgap in between when they started flying private to when every athlete was its own brand on social media and creating their own persona there, where you can at least try and get in touch. So is this like a daily thing where you're trying to work your contacts, seeing what's going on? Or is it not so much like that for you? Are you more interested in covering the team from how you view it objectively as a fan / like a reporter, but that's responsible to the fans? If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I do understand. I think my first and foremost, I think all of our responsibilities are to the fans and our readers. But I think what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is are you constantly searching for unique information?
Yes.
Talking to people. And is that a constant thing, or does that just happen at specific times of the year, and other times of the year are you just covering the day to day? To me, just speaking for myself, I'm always kind of just having conversations with different people and feeling people out, and they'll fill me out. And, there'll be, I don't want to say it's, there's just usually a give and take with these things. And those conversations, for me at least, are ongoing over the course of the year. I'm not always looking to, report. I'd probably report, I would say 10%, maybe 10% of the stuff that I hear in those conversations and that gets bandied about. But I'm not looking to report something like every day. But it's just if you're not having those conversations regularly, you're not going to be able to have those conversations when they matter in times of free agency and the draft and the trade deadline. So that's how I approach it. But at the same time, you have to also cover the day-to-day happenings of the team.
Right.
To me, you kind of blend both, and that's I think the best way to do it. But you're not going to just ignore day-to-day happenings of the Knicks, especially when they're playing well, just because you don't have some kind of unique piece of reporting to include. Right. But the conversations have to, I think, happen regularly. I mean, can I ask you, like, when you were in your
Sure.
positions, were you having were people reaching out to you regularly that you had relationships?
So, you and I would speak not very often. When I was with the Knicks, I was in the room with Phil by the end. I was in the room some of the times with Steve Mills, and I was never in the room with Leon. And I don't know if I ever could have gotten in the room had I stayed, but by then I was on my way out. The majority of the people that I would hear from would be the national guys. With them, and I know I'd be interested to hear what you think about this and what you would say, but with them, it's all an exchange of information, right? If you give them and even if you don't, they develop a rapport with people around the league just by exchanging information. And they do it in a way that it's very skilled, right? So they're not giving up proprietary information, but they're like, this is what I'm hearing. They would never give their source. This is what I'm hearing. This is something you might be aware of. Hey, they hit you up. I don't know if this is interesting to you, but X is on our radar. And then when they have a question about the Knicks, or when I used to coach in the minor leagues, when they had a question about one of the guys on my team, or when I was with the Kings, a direct question about the Kings, they would just hit me up and ask me directly, have you heard this? Is this happening? Can you get confirmation on this? I still occasionally talk to a few of them, and they're asking me a question. I'm like, dude, I sit in my house and trade stocks and lose money and bother Ian Begley to come on my podcast. That 8 people listen to. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
I was going to say, that number is going to climb and climb and climb, not because of me.
Because of you. Exactly, because of you.
I think, and I believe this, man, you've been generous enough to come on our show.
The Putback.
A few times. Been generous with your time, and I've loved your insight and your honesty. in those settings. So, I mean, that to me is what makes for a good, insightful show, and you're going to continue to bring that, I'm sure. So, I think it's, for me, it's similar, right? It's not, hey, I'm a nice guy, can you like help me out? Like you got to bring something to the table, right? So similar equation in my conversations. I'm not always like just asking for like information in every conversation, but I think just developing a relationship over time is the goal, and that's, if I'm doing it right, then that's what I'm doing daily, in addition to the reporting of what's happening on the court with the team day in, day out.
Right. Well, what you've been able to do is pretty remarkable. I mean, there are the stable guys who have been there forever, covering the Knicks forever. And you've been able to kind of crack your way in the door. And everybody kind of, when I was there, everybody spoke very, positively about what you said, what you did, how you handled yourself. And, it kind of leads me to my next question, which is how you started in 2010 at ESPN, and you started with your, on the beat of the Knicks. How has it changed over the years? If it has, maybe it hasn't. And you've seen many iterations. You started in 2010. Was Donnie there? Was it Donnie Walsh, or was it
Donnie was still there,
or was it Glenn?
Donnie was still there. It was I think that off season was the option where they mutually decided to end things, and it was very strange. And then Glenn took over, if my timeline is accurate.
Yeah, I mean, it's all very strange. What Basketball Reference says is Donnie Walsh was there through June of 11. But who knows?
So I think 10, 11 is probably when I started to help Chris Sheridan. And I remember that being the Donnie thing was a surprise, because everybody thought that they would just continue on. But yes, Donnie was there. Donnie, what I remember was he was totally himself with the media, very accessible. You had a question for him, I don't think he was talking on the record all the time, but he was just accessible there and wasn't, afraid of talking to reporters and kind of just bantering with reporters. And I think he enjoyed it. And I don't know what the arrangement was, if there was a specific arrangement, but he clearly had no issue with being seen talking to the media. I think sometimes people over there don't even want to be nearby the media because they don't want the perception that, hey, that's the leak. That's the guy who's leaking all the information to the media. So there's a wariness, I think, at least I've sensed over the years. But Donnie did not have that. He was totally open to having conversations with people before games. And so that was a different approach.
So since Donnie, so you covered Glenn, and then I even forgot this. Steve Mills was hired, and then they hired Phil. And then he kept Steve, and then and then Dolan fired Phil and kept Steve, and now here we are with Leon. But with Glenn, Steve, Phil, Steve, Scott Perry also was the interim GM for a bit, and he's still the GM. I get it, but the interim head guy, and now Leon. Has the access changed at all, or has it been kind of similar the whole time?
The one thing that's changed with Leon Rose is you used to be able to at least expect to hear in a press conference setting from the top basketball person, at least once a year, usually twice a year,
once a year,
beginning and end.
Yeah.
And now that hasn't happened with Leon Rose. Leon Rose, I think he spoke when Tom Thibodeau was hired. He spoke on a Zoom call, and then before that second season with Thibodeau, he and Scott Perry and Tom Thibodeau spoke at a relaxed setting at the practice facility. And I don't think he's spoken to the media since then, other than a couple of MSG Network's interviews. So this is different now, where you're not hearing it all from the top basketball person. And Phil, as you know, he talked regularly for a period of time, and then he stopped talking as regularly because I think I heard that he felt that his words were kind of getting twisted up, which is can happen, certainly in this town. But I think you're just not. Yeah, I haven't been in a scenario where there's been zero from the top basketball person over a period of time, as we are experiencing right now.
That's odd. I always wondered, okay, so I was there when Phil was there. And first of all, let me say this. The presence of the man was undeniable. You're in a room with a guy who's won 11 championships. Mm-hmm. And a couple times I sat in there, and one time specifically, he did like a film on the triangle, which, whatever, we can get into that if you really care about my opinion about the triangle. A very antiquated offense. Nonetheless, he spliced it with a bunch of movie clips, and he was talking through it, and he showed highlights and this. And by the end, I was like, the triangle is the best offense ever.
You were in.
I'm ready. Yeah. I'm ready to go. We're going to win the championship. I was in. So and he didn't raise his voice. He just spoke, and he's such an interesting guy with a presence. Mm-hmm. It proves to me, and I've been around a lot of people, we all have, who have had success in one area. It proves to me that you can be the best at something that doesn't translate even if you're the best coach in the history of the NBA, that doesn't mean you're going to be a very good executive. Right. To your point, he felt like his words were being misconstrued. But on the same hand, he was also the guy who would go in the media when he coached both the Bulls and the Lakers, and he would send messages to his star players through the media. Okay. Yeah. And so then he would do the same thing as an executive and then complain that the words got misconstrued. The one difference being that when you're the coach and you go in the media and you blast Bill Cartwright, you're with the guy. You're with the guy the next hour. You're then on the plane with him. You guys are eating dinner. You see him at shoot around. He's at breakfast. And it's all part of letting the rope go, bringing everybody back in, hugging, touching your guys every day. You can do that as a coach, but you can't do that as a guy making $12 million a year. At some point you got to say yes to the money, and you go to work. Whether or not you want to be there, I don't know. I know he wanted to make it work for sure. I'm not saying that, but was his heart into it from day one? I don't know. I don't know him. I can't speak on that. But to me, it was always interesting with every top guy is the lack of willingness to speak, like Donnie Walsh did. And I wasn't there for Donnie Walsh, but from what I heard and from what most other top executives do, the lack of the willingness to speak lets the relentless, negative slant of New York media just carry the narrative on to wherever they want it to be. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I don't think and by the way, I don't think you're a negative. I don't think you have a negative narrative. I think you call it like you see it, but there are guys, we know that the New York media, the reputation precedes it for a real reason. I mean, they're just, they need stuff to talk about on the local radio, and it just becomes overwhelming.
I would say one thing before I get into the other thing you said. One thing is the coverage, by and large, I mean, it has reflected the win-loss record.
Of course. Yes.
But certainly I think there's a, for sports fans in New York, I think there's a negativity and what's going wrong. Why isn't this happening? There's a passion there, and that passion can give you a negative slant, which I can see how it might not land well with the actual team and the players, but I get it from a fan and media perspective. But I do think that, Joel, you're 100% right in terms of the narrative being filled in by the void that's created when you don't talk, if you're top executive, because you can address things with the media, whether it's in a press conference setting or even just more casually. Something gets reported that's erroneous, you can address it in a way that you see fit, but at least you have the avenue to do it. And when there's no communication, again, it gets filled in by, let's say, another team who deals with you, or an agent who's dealt with you, or a player who played for you and didn't like his experience. And then those kind of things end up filling in the void that you've left by not speaking. So, I mean, nobody cares what I think, but if I was advising people, I would say, hey, cultivate their relationships because it'll help you at some point. But that's not, I mean, from the top down, that's not how things are done with the Knicks. And it is what it is.
Yeah, it's interesting because people get information more. The win-loss record stands, and it's the truth of truths, right? But everything else that happens around the team is fed to somebody with an angle for some reason. Yeah. And if you do not speak and you do not correct the record, or you don't get even out in front of things and talk about why certain things are happening, why certain person wasn't, pursued. You lose the narrative. And I'm not a genius, and I did not originate this thought, but to me, it doesn't make any sense that a team and really like a brand of such significance does not understand this. And so, and I know they don't understand it because I've been in the rooms where they complain about it. Okay. Where they're complaining about the coverage of the team and this certain situation, etc. And I don't know. To me, it was one of the many frustrating things about working there. All right, so switching gears a little, when you cover the Nets, how's the experience different? You can go on as long as you want on this. You could be short or long, but is it a different experience that you have there? And then that's going to lead me into my next question, which I'm very excited about, Kyrie Irving. So,
I think similar because just the nature of access with the league right now, like because of COVID, it was shut down, shut off, and now it's come back incrementally. And I don't know if it's the league or the teams, but there's a mandate that a couple players after each game sit at the podium and do their interviews in front of the cameras, and they don't do it in the locker room. And to me, that, I understand why they like it, because I guess it allows them to send it out to their various media partners, but takes away an intimacy in the locker room where you kind of can get to know a player a little bit better than sitting in a chair and firing questions away from somebody sitting at a table in the locker room setting before and after games. It's a different dynamic. So I think the access with the Nets is similar to the Knicks, and I would venture to guess it's similar throughout the league now because of the way things are set up here in a post-COVID world. Pre-COVID, I wasn't around them a ton, so I don't know how different it was. But I do get I'll say this. Sean Marks spoke regularly to the media, yeah. Still speaks regularly to the media. Win, lose, teams playing well, teams playing poor, it doesn't matter. He'll speak. So I do think that's very different from the Knicks. That's the biggest difference that I could point to off the top of my head.
Got it. Interesting. All right. So for those who aren't familiar, I talk about Kyrie Irving a lot on this show. I'm very anti-faux intellectual. But you were chosen, or you pursued, and I want to hear how this came about, the interview where after the team suspended Kyrie, he went on his, he went and reflected. And then one of the ways before he was able to come back was to get interviewed, I guess, or issue an apology through an interview. And you were the one who conducted that interview. So 2-part question. How did that come about? Mm-hmm. And what were your thoughts on that? Because I just watched it back, and I'd like to hear your thoughts before I give my own.
Sure. So how did it come about? I assume, like every other kind of reporter covering the Nets and Kyrie and everything going on, I had been reaching out to Kyrie Irving's agent, and I had been speaking to Kyrie Irving's agent as much as I could, just to try to talk about what I had been planning to report, and also just to try to gain some more perspective and context from Kyrie's side on everything that was happening. And look, I assume everybody else was doing the same thing, but there was a point where I had a question, and I reached out, and part of the conversation was, "Hey, do you want to talk to Kyrie Irving?" And I said, yes, absolutely.
Course,
Yeah,
right.
certainly. So that was, I think, a day before the interview. But yeah, it just kind of happened in the flow of being in touch with a player's agent. And I don't know why, how, or what, their thinking was. I mean, if you wanted me to guess, I guess I could guess. But the only thing I know is that it came up pretty much organically from my perspective. And I think that maybe there was just me being in touch and not just running with everything that I had heard and just my process. Maybe that it was appreciated, but that's kind of how it came about. And then, yeah, the interview happened the next day. And then, sorry, Joel, my thoughts on the actual interview. So the interview was originally talked about as a print interview with a couple of questions that we were going to do, some like 2 or 3 questions on camera, and then we are going to do the rest in print. And it was going to be, I think, maybe 10 minutes. And so there was 3 questions that I knew I wanted to get in for sure within the 10-minute time frame. And then it just ended up being a lot longer. And I think, I don't know why or how, but I guess he felt comfortable and we kept going. But there were, in the aftermath of it, I wish that I had known that it was going to last as long as it did, because I would have asked some follow-up questions had I known it was going to last beyond 10 minutes. Because again, there was a few questions I wanted to certainly get in. And then there was points where I would have followed up if I had known that there was no buzzer. I kept thinking the thing was going to end when he was done with his last answer, and then it didn't. So I wish I'd been a little more aware of it going longer than I had anticipated going into it.
Well, I thought you did a good job. It was like 20 minutes. Obviously, some people might be thinking, oh, well, he got it because he's Jewish. I got to tell you, there's a lot of Jewish reporters in the New York media, so we can probably take that off the table. To me,
there are many of us that were right.
All right, but you're the most handsome. No, but to me, I thought it was the perfect encapsulation of what it should have been. You ask questions, you ask very direct questions, and he pontificated with a lot of words that made sense when he strung them together in the moment. But I went back and I've listened to that. I've listened to that interview like 5 times, and he says nothing. Basically, he says that he is very sorry that his words were interpreted to be anti-Semitic, and he knows he's not anti-Semitic based on where he grew up and how he thinks, with no acknowledgement, no real acknowledgement of why he was in the position that he was in. The idea that you guys wake up, you being the New York sports media, wake up and want to talk to Kyrie Irving about an anti-Semitic film that he has retweeted, okay, is asinine to me. And but he can't have that realization even at any point. And the timeline of how this came to be, where he was being reached out to by a lot of people. This has been written about. I don't know if you wrote it or somebody else, but this has been talked about and written about how people were reaching out to him all the way up to Adam Silver, Joe Tsai. Everybody was trying to get in touch with him to make him understand the gravity of what was transpiring. Because whether or not he wants to believe it, he has a major impact. And if he doesn't believe it, just look at what happened after all of this happened. The Black Hebrew Israelites were petitioning outside of Brooklyn Net games for weeks after, and they are a anti-Semitic. Among other things, they ascribe to anti-Semitic views, and they share them. And so that's not all they stand for. That's not what I'm saying, but that is a perfect reflection of from point A to point B, but you can't get to point C when you're an athlete. Is it fair? No. But, you make a lot of money. You're an incredibly skilled basketball player. You deserve to make the money because you are entertaining people. But what comes with that is everybody hangs on all your words. And to me, it really bothers me with him specifically, and I can't figure out why. And I talk about it a lot. Why it bothers me? He doesn't realize this, and there have been many athletes before him that don't realize this, but it really bothers me. And listen, I thought you did a great job. Honestly, you could have pinned him down a few more times, but what would it really have done? It wouldn't have done anything. He would have said the exact same stuff because you did pin him down a few times. You followed up, but a few times, and he just kept repeating the same circular conversation. So I don't know.
The one thing that I took away from it was when he said that he was just really, I guess he reacted emotionally to initially him being labeled
anti-Semitic. Yeah.
And so he said that the question to him, are you anti-Semitic? He said it should be it could be a simple yes or no answer. And it should have been. And that when he said that, that's the one thing that stuck out to me, where he was acknowledging that he let his emotions get the best of him in that press conference setting, where he could have just steered it in a different direction. And he was saying that he should have in the aftermath of the whole thing.
Yeah. And listen, had he had that press conference and then immediately come out, or if he had, we can't judge people on their worst moments. I think that's a real problem in society today. But this was not one single instance of what happened here. There was the tweet, there was the reach out, there was the initial initial denial, not denial, but initial pushback, the second pushback, and then finally the suspension. So, whatever. Okay. I've beaten this to death, and I will continue to ask every single person who comes on this program what they think of him. All right. We've done 40 minutes of things that I find very interesting. You might not find it, but now I owe it to all the Knick fanboys out there to get into this team. Nobody knows them better than you. What are your thoughts on the 9-game winning streak, the 1-game losing streak? What do you think their ceiling is? And let's hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think that it's Thursday, right? So they're going into this 4-game West Coast trip. We'll see how that ends up, but they've proven that they can win on the road. So I think if you get Jalen Brunson back and healthy, and this foot soreness doesn't linger, it's not something that he'll continue to have to deal with. They'll be in very good shape in terms of the stretch run here and the postseason. And it seems that they'll most likely end up playing Cleveland in a 4-5 matchup, whether they are the 4 or the 5. Although, I mean, Joel, we were talking about the Nets. Mikal Bridges is playing really well. It seems like Thursday night, it seems like they're sitting everybody for that Milwaukee game. There's some injuries, so doesn't seem like they'll beat Milwaukee, but they've played some solid basketball lately. And so I would not count them out, but most likely we're talking Knicks and Cleveland, first round, 4-5. And I think Randall, if he continues to play the way that he has in terms of allowing Jalen Brunson to impact him and the team the way that we've seen over the course of the season, and not taking a lot on himself. I mean, it's worked out really well for this Knick offense, which I think was ranked 5th coming into that Charlotte loss in offensive efficiency. So I would think they have a pretty good shot against the Cavs, who wouldn't have played all together with Donovan Mitchell in a playoff setting to that point. That's kind of
would be pretty fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be a fun series. But I think the Knicks have certainly exceeded my expectations coming into the season for them. I thought taking a nominal step forward where they were, playing tournament, get into the playoffs through the playing tournament, that would have been meeting expectations, but they've gone above and beyond that. And Tom Thibodeau cutting the rotation to 9 players obviously was a big part of it. Manuel quickly taking a leap, Jalen Brunson playing really beyond probably anyone's expectations as in his first opportunity to really lead a team. He's been phenomenal. So it's really all worked out well for Leon Rose and his group.
Yeah. I mean, Brunson has gotten better. I came on the putback with the Grady and Begley and other Knick insiders to say that, And yeah, no, we talked about it, and Brunson has gotten better over the course of the year, running his own show. I mean, when you play with Luka and then you come and run your own show, there is an adjustment period. And there are many runs during the season. You never look as good as your best. You're never as bad as your worst. And I think the Knicks are 2.5 games back of the Cavs. They stand at 39-28. And to your point, they're a game up on the Nets, but the Nets, who knows? They've won 3 in a row, but most likely, I agree, it's the 4-5 matchup. And if you're the Knicks, what you've proven is you can win on the road. As crazy as MSG is, as great as that building is to play in, they have a bunch of guys that are tough and seem to relish it. I think the Randall. What do you make of Randall? I mean, he had a great year 2 years ago. He had a up and down, to be generous, year last year, and then to your point, he's propelled, and you can say it has to do with Brunson, but he also has gotten better this year, and he's getting better as the Knicks are winning, and they seem to go as he goes. But he's always been a little bit temperamental. What do you think of him?
I would go even one season back, where his first year in New York, he really struggled with what he was being asked to do, and then he bounced back and had that all NBA season. And then you mentioned the progression since then. And, he's talked about, he's been open in terms of talking about, especially after he made the All-Star team. He had a press conference that night, and he talked about the idea that he had to change his approach on the court and off the court, and how he had a tough time last year dealing with failure. He was, I don't know, I can't remember the word he used in terms of just loving the success and tasting the success and really relishing that, but then having a hard time with the failures that came with last season and not handling it well. And I think struggling to stay kind of in the moment and level headed. And I think that was evident, over the course of last year. But he said this year, I think that was an adjustment. He's openly spoken about adjusting his mindset. And you see that, to me at least, look at the recent win in Miami, where he obviously hits that big shot at the end. But before that, maybe it was a minute before, he had a costly turnover. And, he obviously brushed that aside and was able to lock in and hit that shot. And that Boston win, the double OT win, he gets called for a technical that clearly the Knicks didn't feel like that was the right call. He calms himself down and continues to play, and they win the game. So to me, I hate getting into a player's mind, trying to guess at their mentality, but Julius has talked about it openly, right? So I feel comfortable commenting on it in this instance, the idea of the adjustment that he's made off the court. And then on the court, he's taking very good shots. Like the offense was running through him for good or bad for the first 3 years, for his first 3 years as Nick. And now he doesn't have that burden on him where he's a focal point of it every time, because it's Jalen Brunson, and Brunson could play off him. He can play off Brunson. It lessens the burden on him possession by possession. And I think you're seeing the benefits of that right now.
Yeah, he's playing great. They obviously swung and missed, quote unquote, depending on, you probably know more about this, in Donovan Mitchell this offseason. For me, if you sign Brunson, I don't think you sign Donovan Mitchell. I mean, I don't think you trade for Donovan Mitchell. I think their assets that they have acquired and accumulated are going to be better used somewhere else. And I've maintained that. I don't know if I'm right. But what are you hearing this offseason? I mean, I keep hearing one name specifically. I'm sure you're hearing the same, but you're much more in the know.
Well, I keep hearing about the situation, not hearing, but saying, keep an eye on Philadelphia because of that situation, what could happen there with whispers about Harden and Houston, and then what happens with Joel Embiid. The Bradley Beal one, I think, is always going to be out there, but he has a no trade clause, which makes it difficult, and the salary is onerous. Zach LaVine, I wonder if that gets revisited. There are reasons why I see that as less likely to happen in terms of him coming to New York. a couple factors there that I see. And then, you see how the playoffs go, right? But I think Towns is always going to be one who's at least teams keep an eye on because of what's happened in Minnesota and how it hasn't gone the way that the T-Wolves have wanted it to. So I think there are a number of different scenarios where the Knicks could be in play on a big time player. We talked about him already with Mikal Bridges. I mean, I don't pretend to be James Naismith or a basketball expert, but I guess Bridges would probably fit well on anyone's roster. But given the complexion of the Knicks roster in terms of Brunson with the ball in his hands and Randall with the ball in his hands, like Bridges to me would be such an excellent fit. Can't see the Nets trading him to New York if they're going to trade him anywhere. But yeah, they will. I mean, they feel like they have the assets to be in these conversations when the opportunity arises. Now, I need to ask you, do you want to mention the name that's on your mind?
Yeah, the Embiid name is the name that I've heard a bunch. Yeah. And it seems like, I don't work in basketball and I've heard the name. People call, are we going to get Embiid? Do you think, I saw I saw some of my friends coincidentally on a work trip, and that's all they were talking about. Coaches in the NBA, and it's like the least kept secret thing. They, if they don't win a championship, the Harden to Houston thing makes no sense to me. If you're the Houston Rockets,
I agree.
So, I'm not the first person in sports media to say this. This is not an original point, but why? Why is Houston? Why? He's going to do is take over your franchise and stunt your young players' growth. But who knows? And then, go ahead.
I was just going to say a quick aside. My conspiracy theory is if you create enough of a market for Harden, does it then push Philadelphia to give him a deal that maybe the owners wouldn't be organically willing to sign off on? That's just my little conspiracy theory that why there's so much buzz about Harden. But I agree with you. Go ahead.
Interesting. No, I mean, that's good information. And then I also hear Cat. I mean, to me, those are the two guys that make the most sense. Except for, Bridges would be wonderful, but I second your notion that if he goes anywhere, which, why trade him? I mean, he's a young player who's got great length, who really defends, who is now flourishing when he's as the first option, but not only flourishing, but contributing to winning and leading to winning. Whether you're the first, second option on offense, whatever, those are the guys that you build around. I thought Sean Marks smartly, because I don't know what you heard, but I heard there was like 3 or 4 first round picks for a few teams offered for Bridges, and he smartly said, we've done enough here. And let's see what we have at the deadline, right when after they traded for Durant. Did you hear that as well?
Well, I was hearing not as much on Mikal, but the idea of Toronto was just in any conversation really wanted Nick Claxton, and the Nets did not want to go there on anything. So that's why I'd been hearing at the deadline. But I saw a couple reports on Bridges, and it makes a lot of sense to hold on to him, because if you dealt him for picks, my guess, right, is that Joe Tsai would want a competitive team and want to try to make the playoffs here after what he's seen and invested in over the last 3.5 years. So I don't think they're in position to fully blow it up and go through this long-term rebuild again. That's why it would make sense to me that he would have held on to Bridges the way he did.
Right. Interesting. Any other tidbits around the league that you're hearing, looking at, that you find interesting, that you've heard?
The stuff that, the Atlanta stuff, from a lot of people have written pre-deadline about it. And now maybe things are just totally solidified with Quinn Snyder there. But just the way things were going leading up to the deadline, I was surprised that there weren't more trades. And I think there was, maybe I want to say that there was maybe not expectations, but thoughts that other players would be moved that just didn't get moved. And I think that it surprised some teams around the league that certain players were not moved ahead of the deadline. What that means for them, big picture, I'm not sure, but it just seems like a very rocky patch for that Hawks franchise. Maybe Quinn Snyder comes in and with Landry Fields kind of steadies the ship.
That seems to be their hope, right? But this will be Trae Young's third coach. So, my feeling is, after a certain point, it becomes not the coach, it becomes the player.
Right.
But yeah, it should be interesting. One coaching note I heard is funny. And, cause I'm a minor league guy, I heard Nick Nurse might be leaving there and going to Houston. But who knows? I have no idea. And that Gerson Rosas might also be going back to Houston. I don't know if that's true.
Current Nick,
something or another. Yes,
he was a consultant. Now I think he's a senior advisor. So
I heard that. Who has any idea though? I'm not a sports reporter, but somebody thought that enough to share it with me. Anyways, well, I guess we'll see. Go ahead.
I was going to say you're not a reporter, but you're a bastion of intel at times. Not that you've ever leaked anything to me. Let's just be clear.
It's okay. I'm out. You can. I wish I had more stuff to leak to you, Ian. I can pass on rumors, but what does that help you? All right. Before I get you out of here, why don't you just tell me who you think comes out of the East and the West? My fanboy Knicks friends.
Yeah. Tell me if you agree with me. Milwaukee. That Kevin Durant slip last night on the layup line certainly changes things out west. Jeez. I think he comes back, and I think that they're okay enough. And I still think they'll get through because I think they'll be okay, even with the ankle. So it's Phoenix. What are your thoughts?
And then who wins the finals?
Milwaukee.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree. Milwaukee coming out of the East. Boston has not looked good here recently, but again, I don't judge people based on how they look. 20 games before the season ends. The Phoenix thing is interesting. We've never seen a team add their best player, and then really, if the reports are true, and he has a grade 2 ankle sprain. And he can't play until, let's call it, the last 5 games, or even can't play any of the games, and just is going to be ready for the playoffs. I don't know how that works. I think they're the best team, but we have never seen that I can remember in the history of the NBA. I was talking to somebody on this podcast, and they said Gasol, maybe it was Mo Dakhil, said, when they added Gasol, that was like, an interesting comp. Well, Gasol was the second best player on that team. The Laker team. Right. And so to me, we've never seen it. I think Durant's obviously the best plug and play player in the league. You just plug him in anywhere and he's going to do what he does. Yeah. And yeah.
It's not,
and I do think,
not a hard,
go ahead. It's not a hard fit. Yeah.
But it's still on the fly and high leverage.
Yeah. It's still on the fly. Like you can, it's not a hard fit. He fits anywhere. So the fit isn't the issue. The issue is, Denver's been playing together for 4 years, all their main guys. And I think Denver is a bad matchup for Phoenix. I think Phoenix is a bad matchup for Denver. I think Jokic is amazing, but I think he's really would struggle on the defensive end against them. And they can do different things to hide him and whatever else. But, I think it's going to be really interesting. If you made me choose, I would choose Denver just based on the continuity. And, if you can't get on the floor, this isn't an all-star team. Teams actually start really scheming. They start trying. And then I think Milwaukee wins the championship if you made me choose. Well, Ian, you are the king.
In that scenario, we're both going Milwaukee. There we go.
Yeah. Two of the great minds think alike. Yeah. Ian, you're the king, man. I appreciate you coming on. And hopefully we run this Tuesday, and hopefully you'll come on again. I really appreciated it, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise, my friend. I had a lot of fun. It's always great talking to you on camera, off camera, and I wish you the best with the show, and I'd be happy to come back on anytime.
All right, you're the man, Ian. Thanks. Have a good day. Peace.